individuals in a very dramatic way. And it's his yahrzeit this past Shabbat, and I spoke at Mishkan Avrum, which is across the street from where I live. It's at the Ulpana. And I said the very unique thing about my father was sometimes you'll get a person who's very broad in nature, very big, has the ability really to make an impact on a lot of people in a big pond. And they either do or they don't. And then sometimes you'll meet somebody who is big, but they decide that they're going to put their strengths and their energy into a smaller pond, and therefore their effect is in some ways even greater by and large because, albeit because there's less people, but the effect on those people can be incredibly big. My father and my mother were great examples of that. Rabbi Bulka in Ottawa was an incredible example of that. And there's Rabbi Green in Hamilton. I mean, there are rabbis throughout this nation who decided that they were going to stay in smaller shtetl, if you will, and build the shtetl while they were there and give to those individuals, that community, in with all of their strength, with all of their energy. And I think it's safe to say that what happened was that many, many people, many community members, and their children were impacted so much by my father's strength and energy, his vision, his ability to teach, his ability to give, that many of them became religious. Some of them actually became Haredi. When I say Haredi, I mean ultra Orthodox. Some of them moved to Israel. There's one fellow whom I'm thinking of who moved to Sfat, and and others adopted Judaism traditionally and culturally, but they maintain it to this day. We are very lucky, those of us who hear stories about our mother and our father, people whom we love dearly, whom we have lost. Yes, at the Shiva, and that's a wonderful place to hear about who our family members were in a way we may not have known otherwise. But then afterwards as well, because I'm a rabbinical son, the stories are aplenty. And even to this day, I am deeply, deeply honored to hear about what my father's accomplishments were in Kitchener and what my mother's accomplishments were. So I was exposed. Elaine, you're from Kitchener? Elaine Biscoe? Can't hear you. Can't hear you. Can't hear you.
I lived in Kitchener for a while, but my brother-in-law and sister-in-law lived there all their lives.
Bisgolds, the Bisgolds. Yeah.
Right. That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, of course, of course. Well, nice to see you.
Good to see
Um,
you too.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I was exposed to the rabbinical world, and that world was a really special one. And I've spoken about it before, what my parents did in terms of bringing the stranger into our home. And I was also exposed to the Torah world. Now, the Torah world really, it's like my breath. When we speak about Pirkei Avot as an example, we all know that Pirkei Avot traditionally is taught after Mincha and Shabbat, and just short little Mishnayot is taught and expounded upon. But when you are taught this from an early age, through shul, through Talmud Torah, through day school, it becomes part of you, and it's actually really hard to see past it, um, because the learning and the values are often inculcated into your psyche, as it was in mine. Later on, when I left Kitchener at 13 years old, I went to yeshiva here in Toronto, Ner Yisrael Yeshiva, and I was there for 5 years. And then I went to a yeshiva, as Heather said, I went to yeshiva in Sanhedrin Mochavet in Jerusalem, called Beit Talmud, which is very, very Haredi yeshiva, very right wing. That's kind of the path that I followed in yeshiva because my father wanted me to. Wasn't the right place for me. But that being said, sometimes one will find themselves in a particular, let's say, law firm, and it's just not the culture that they really want. But they learn a lot from it. When I started and launched Via Hafta, the culture of Via Hafta was dramatically different than it was at UJA, where I was for 7 years. but I learned so much at the UJA, which helped me develop via Havta. So I learned a ton of Torah. I learned a lot of Torah. I was just looking at some of my Sforim the other day, and I have all five of my Gemaras from my yeshiva years, and it's just a pleasure to look back on them. You may have your high school books or books you used in college. My father's legacy was not one of writing so much. He wrote a little bit, but what his legacy to me and my sisters is he used to underline in books. He used to underline. So when I take out my father's form, of which I have a number, and I'll open it up, I'll see what he underlined. And that speaks to me incredibly. I think that's a really interesting little piece. I don't know if anyone here has had such an experience where they open up a book of someone they knew and they see what they underline. They go, oh, for some reason, that idea, that thought was intriguing to them. I'll tell you what's equally as interesting. If anybody here buys used books, I like books of any ilk. I don't care if they're used, brand new, old. Sometimes the older ones are really incredible to have. I smell them, You can smell the pages when they're very old, have that particular, sometimes an odor to it, but a particular fragrance. And you open it up and you'll see a person's name in it, like, Barbara McDonald, grade 12. I'll use Kitchener as an example, this collegiate, this high school, whatever. You obviously start to think about, oh, who was this person, right? And then you flip through the book and you see what he or she underlined, and you get a sense of the stranger, this person you'll never meet, but held that book in their hands and read that book, just as you are now. And there's something about that connects you with them, hence a connection with the world. So I had all of this. My yeshiva learning was intense. At 13 years old, we would start at 7:30 in the morning. We would daven Shachris, and then after Shachris, we would have breakfast, and then we would have Limude Kodesh, which was Jewish studies from 9 in the morning until 1. We would have lunch, and then from 1 till 2 would be lunch, and then we would have an afternoon Seder. And then we would have secular studies from 3 till 7. We would have dinner, little time for homework. Then we would go back and have a night Seder. Night Seder would be from quarter to 9 till quarter to 10. And then we would daven Marv. And the day was done. Yeah. And you were 13 years old, And you think to yourself, my God, this is unbelievable. Has anybody else here been in that in yeshiva environment? Brian, were you in that in yeshiva environment? You muted. Can hear you.
I was in a yeshiva environment, but in a high school one where I went to Orchaim for 2 years.
Or Chaim, yeah, yeah.
And it was even worse because I had to take a bus there at 6 in the
Right.
morning
Yes,
and then take a
yes.
bus home at like 10 o'clock at night and then do
Crazy, eh?
homework.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a challenge.
Do you look back on it though as being positive?
From the discipline point of view and from the being able to juggle many different subjects and challenges at one time and sort of prioritizing your time, yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, I think they could have lightened up a little bit, for 13, 15-year-old, whatever we were. Life could have lightened up, maybe a basketball game here and there, but like there was no gym, there was nothing. There was
Yeah, I
like
know.
you just
Yeah.
sat and learned all
You
day.
s- All day long. All day long. You and I are on the same page because there was something about it, which was beautiful. It really was. We slept in a dormitory, so we were with the same guys all the time, and with my class, I was with them for 4 or 5 years. So it was very special, that camaraderie. It's like when Gretzky retired, they asked him, Wayne, what are you going to miss the most? He said the dressing room. I'm going to miss the guys.
Yeah.
And that's how we are. But the learning itself, as I said before, it was part of my genetics. It became part of my breathing. Somebody asked me when we played. You found time to play mostly because we were in a dormitory, and guys are like that. Like young kids are like that. They always find time to play. They figure it out. They have to, or else you'd be on Spilkus the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Um, later on in life, as I grew and my life started to progress, I think I went through what many people go through. Learning sort of takes a back seat, and it does because your career takes a front seat. You know, your family takes a front seat. There are so many priorities that you have to take care of. And for all of us who, who have raised children, who have been part of a family, it's a very challenging time in life, albeit a very beautiful time and a very special time, and you're on super speed for many years. But learning, it's very hard to concentrate on learning during those days. If you're lucky, if you're one who goes to shul all the time, you can catch a shear here or there. But I was not really of that ilk, and it was very hard for me to learn Torah. So I decided I'll move forward very quickly because I know we have a limited amount of time. I decided about 3 years ago that I was going to ensconce myself in some very intense Torah learning. Now, why was it that particular time? Because Daf Yomi started its new cycle. I'll just explain to you Daf Yomi for a moment, okay? We have the Jewish people do what is called the Talmud, right? Mishnayot and the Gemara. And it is essentially a number of tractates, but we learn about 35 of them. There's more, though. There's around 60, I think. We learn actually with the Gemara around 35 of them. And what it is, it's very smart at what it is. It's taking our Chumash and it is deciphering it, it's analyzing it. So, as an example, when the Torah says something as almost homiletic as one should honor their mother and father, I would ask you, is that carte blanche? Is that black and white? Right? What happens if your mother and father, your father comes along and he says, I want you to shoot that dog? You do it? You do it, Ruth Shapiro? So you didn't shoot the dog.
No, I wouldn't shoot the dog.
Right. You would not honor your mother or father if they told you to do that, right? Why? Why? Because there are some things that supersede the law of kibbud avim, of honoring your mother and father. Now, what happens is we set down the Mishnayot, which is the basic laws, a very sort of basic argumentation back and forth between rabbis, and then the Gemara comes along. And then what they do is they analyze what was stated in the Mishnayot. Okay. And this was over about a 500-year period. And eventually it was closed, it was locked. And one today cannot add to the Talmud, cannot add to the Gemara. However, what you can do is you can analyze it, you can extrapolate, you can discuss it, you can argue it, okay? But you can't take a Mishnayot, you can't take a Talmud, a piece of the Talmud, and add a line to the end of it. That it is closed, finished, kaput. So the rabbis came along and they created this incredible piece of knowledge, which is unique in the world. There is nothing else like it. And it became really the spine, if you will, sort of the central motif of Jewish study. Now, is there anybody here, if you could tell me, please, is there anybody here who has studied Gemara? You can put up your hand. But Brian, you have, right?
Yes.
Okay. Do you enjoy Gemara?
No, I find it very, it's too many arguments, too much, it's more not getting to the point. It's I don't have the discipline to go through how the Gemara is taking an issue and deciphering it.
Right.
To me, I want to know the answer and move on.
Chuck, get to the end. Yeah. I understand that. Anybody else here learn Gemara? Naomi, you have, eh? Can you tell us which Gemara you learned?
It's my, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
It's okay. My husband and I actually started learning Gemara together.
Oh, that's so nice.
it's something that neither one of us, like we studied Parshat Shavua and we studied Torah together, and this was just something out of curiosity. Our kids recommended this is a neat thing to do, and they told us, kind of directed us, look at this one, look at this one. So a couple of years ago, we started Masachet Rosh Hashanah,
Very good.
and it was challenging. I found it really challenging. I'm used to a little more straightforward. And
Yeah, it is
as
challenging.
Brian said, I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of arguing. You don't always get an answer. You get a lot of questions, but not always answers. It was challenging. We're currently studying the Masachet Megillah. I'm loving it a lot more.
Yes, you would.
It's a little more
Megillah is a good one.
concise. It's there are answers. There are disagreements. I mean, that's kind of what the basis of Gemara is. That you have when I sit to learn, I always imagine like I'm part of this group of a bunch of people sitting around the table and discussing a subject. That's kind of what it feels like to me. And everybody's giving their 2 cents. I say this, no, I say this. So and so said this, and so and so said this, but I say this.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and it's I don't know. I'm growing to love it.
That is wonderful. And by the way, I think it is a very, very special thing that your chavruta is your husband. I think that's very, very special. What a blessing you two have,
It's nice.
I wanted to, did anybody else want to add anything? Marty, did you want to say something about Gemara?
No, I just wanted to say a little bit. It's been years since I studied Gemara. I'm a graduate of Chat back in the 70s. There was a Mishnah stream and a Gemara stream. I did a little bit of the Gemara stream, but it was mainly Mishnah. But I liked it, but it's been a long time.
The thing about, what year did you graduate, Marty?
I graduated in 77.
So I graduated in 78. I think, yeah, I graduated in 78, yeah. I think, Brian, your brother, Dov, graduated in 78 as well. So, right, correct, 78?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing about Gemara is that it is an intergenerational discussion and debate. So you'll find within the Gemara, as Naomi said, as Brian said, as Marty alluded to, you'll find that an argument erupts, if you will, in, let's say, the year 200. And a particular rabbi will state his opinion about that particular issue. Let's say it has to do with Hashutvim Sharatzu Lapsos Mechitza. Let's say you own a piece of land with someone else, okay? Say you have something north here, right? Really nice farm, a hobby farm. You plant things, you have a goat, you have some chickens, and you build a wall or a fence of sorts on that farm together with your neighbor, right? So the Mishnah says, a shoot from Shiraz Lasos Mechitza, if 2 people build it and it falls, well, what is the responsibility at that point? Who's got to pay for that? And how do you pay it? And how much do you pay? And then the Gemara sets about, in one generation, talking about the various different types of materials that the fence was built out of. And then the generations move on, and they will argue, well, you say it's made out of lime, and I think that the Mishnah was talking about, no, it wasn't made out of lime. It was made out of mud, another substance. And all of this plays into what one is supposed to do when that wall falls. The fascinating thing about the Gemara, if you ask me, at least one of the main things, is the intergenerational aspect of it. Can you imagine if this group right here, the Beth David group series on Torah, set about establishing an idea, thought, having to do with Torah, let's say as it applied to the shul. And we developed it as far as we possibly could. And everybody had an opinion and everybody was wise and they all came to the table with these very interesting, elaborate tributaries of thought. We put them together. We came up with a thesis and we said, okay, this is a good thesis. We'll implement it. Now comes along the next generation of Beth David members, and they take a look. They go, this is actually very crucial. We're talking about something very important to the shul. Let's pull out the thesis that was established in 2022. It's now 2052. We'll take it out and let's read it, let's study it, and so on. And then they start to pull it apart. They start to try to understand it. They look at some of the characters who were involved in developing it, because that's a big part of the Gemara. Who were these people who stated these opinions? What was their yichus? What was their ability to make such a statement? Who were they? When you think about someone like Rav Yehuda Nasi, who was one of the people who put together the Mishnayot, one doesn't question who he was, but there's other names in the Gemara that no one's ever heard of. They're mentioned maybe once in all the tractates. And they start to put together this new idea, this new thought. That is what the Gemara is all about. And then when you take it a step further and you open it up and you study it, and Brian is correct, there's a lot of argumentation, there's a lot of legal stuff that happens in there, but there is also a lot of what we call agarata. Agarata essentially is storytelling. Okay? Storytelling is prominent within our teachings, amongst our people, to the extent that last week was Parshat Bereshit, and Rabbi Sachs, Zachrenu Livracha, if you don't read his stuff, read his stuff. Man was a gadol, he was Talmud Chacham, and he showed people his thinking. I think one of the problems with Talmidei Chachamim today is that we don't know who they are. They don't introduce themselves to us. We need to know who they are. We need to grow through them. Rabbi Sachs allowed for that. He talked about the idea that all of Bereshit and part of Shemot is essentially, it's a story. It's told in a story way. Why? Because everybody can relate to a story. And he said what's very interesting about the story, it really does apply to the rules of storytelling. How? He says, he writes like this very prolifically. He says, well, we're reading about Chava, and she's approached by the serpent, and you know what? We don't know. Is she going to eat? I think that's the Gemara. I think it's a machlokas. What it was? Let's say a fig. I don't think anyone says an apple. She says, is she going to eat that fig? And we're sitting there on shpilkus, on the end of our chair. Is Chava going to eat the fig? And then later on, when God approaches Cain, and he warns him about what will be if his behavior is bad, we don't know if Cain's going to follow that or not. And then we go further on in the Chumash, and we see that Esav comes to visit his brother Yaakov, and we're sitting there, we're going like, is he going to kill him? Or is he going to embrace him? And even though we've learned this before, the fascinating thing about it is, for some reason, maybe we fool ourselves. I guess we do, we kind of make it like, I don't know, geez, I hope things go well for Yaakov. I hope his brother Esav, that ruddy red, hunter, doesn't kill his brother, and in the end he doesn't. So Rabbi Sachs says that's why it's told in a story sort of way, because through a story we can learn about human nature, we can learn about human behavior, right? We can understand it in a much better way than technically anybody can, whether you're 5 years old or whether you're 95 years old. And the Gemara includes in it what's called agadata. Agadata is storytelling by and large. And there's books written with stories from the Talmud. I'm going to tell you two of them. This was last week in Ksuvos, the Gemara that I'm learning. I should say, by the way, I am staying up with Daf Yomi, and I think I finished my 13th Gemara or something in close to 3 years. So I'm really, really proud of myself. But it is very hard, and I have to be honest with you, a lot of stuff I don't get. But that being said, so there's a Gemara a few days ago in Ksuvos, and the Gemara talks about the importance of honoring a Talmud Chacham. The Talmud Chacham, someone who is great in their thinking, and brings a lot to the Jewish people that way. Rav Yehuda Nasi, he was very, very ill. And rabbis everywhere and people everywhere were praying for him, that he should live. Now the problem is the man was extraordinarily sick. When you learn Gomorrah, one of the things that you find is that essentially you are privy to what happened 2,000 years ago. Like, how often do you read a document or do you study a document that gives you insight, unless you love history, that gives you insight into what occurred on the streets of Israel, let's say 2,000 years ago, or Babylon 2,000 years ago? So to me, when I study Gemara, one of the ways that I relate to it is by looking at the behavior at the time, by looking at the examples that they give. There are no examples of computers in the Gemara, as an example, but there are plenty examples about horses and cows, and if you have to shoe a horse, how do you shoe the horse? There's a lot of agricultural examples. There's a lot of examples about sewing and knitting, and obviously how it affects one Shabbat, whether they can knit on Shabbat, and if they do, how many stitches can they knit? So the Torah, the Gemara speaks extensively, clearly about things that happened at that time. So the Rabbi Rav Yehuda Nasi was one of the greatest Jewish minds of all time. He was very sick. And the Gemara literally says, because the Gemara is out there, it's out there, it doesn't mince words. He was running to the bathroom a lot. The Gemara says that. And who saw this? His caregiver. I was going to say his Filipino caregiver, his caregiver. And they mentioned her in the Gemara, which is a big zchut. It's a very big deal to be mentioned in the Gemara. And she saw how this man, whom she cared about so deeply, yes, as a rabbi, yes, as a leader, yes, as a man who put together the Mishnayot, but she cared about him so deeply. If you've ever been a caregiver, you'll know what that feeling you have of the person you're taking care of. Your empathy runs so deeply, your sympathy is so acute. And the Gemara basically reflects, and she said to her, reflects on that, and she says to herself, I can see that there's a battle going on here. There's a battle between heaven and earth. On earth, the rabbis are praying that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi should not die. And they're praying and praying and praying to the extent that one of the rabbis in the Gemara said, "Look," and by the way, their phrases, their metaphors are often very hyperbolic, very colorful. And one of the rabbis said, "Should anybody wish that Rabbi Yehuda Nasi should die, they will be stabbed with a sword." Stabbed with a sword. That's how the Gemara talks. It's very dramatic. The words are very dramatic. You see that in literature too, in the Middle East, in Arabic poetry and so on. Very dramatic stuff. So she saw this battle going back and forth between heaven and earth. This is how the Gemara puts it, right? Fascinating, because the imagery is very powerful. And she sees that this man whom she cares about so deeply is suffering so badly. And the rabbis just keep on praying and keep on praying that he should live. So what does she do in her inimitable wisdom? Because caregivers are wise. They understand human behavior. They understand suffering. What does she do? She pushes a pot over the roof where she is. She's up there. And it falls to the ground. And of course, it shatters. And when it shatters, what does everybody do? They stop davening. They stop praying. And when they stop praying, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi perishes. Very interesting, Agadata, right? Very interesting. And I'll tell you something, okay? Beinenu, between us, when my mother was sick and she was on her last breath, basically, and she was suffering terribly, I said to the doctors, what can we do? Because it's the worst thing in the world to see someone whom you love suffer. He says, well, we can increase her morphine. I said, that'll help. He goes, that'll help. I said, then do it. And he did it. And when I read the story about Rabbi Yehuda Nasi's caregiver, I thought to myself, let us not judge what goes on a day-to-day basis in hospitals or with caregivers. Who are we to judge? Well, we're humankind. And when someone is suffering, whom we love so dearly, or not, chas v'sholom, God forbid, a child, we do judge and we do make decisions. And that caregiver in the Gemara 2,000 years ago made this very important decision about the end of the life of Rav Yehuda Hanasi. And God clearly went along with it, right? So that's one piece of Agarata which I want to share with you. And this goes back to our original question of, can we be proud of Torah, through Torah? My answer is yes. The second piece of Agarata that I wanted to share with you, we found in the Gemara and Sota. The halacha, or the laws around Sota, are as follows. Essentially, what happens is, if two people ostensibly are coming together and having an extramarital affair, they're married, then what happens is they have to drink from this bitter liquid that's created with God's name in it, right? And the Chumash talks about this, and then the Gemara obviously expounds on it. And if indeed she was having an extramarital affair, then, and she drinks that water, she blows up. She blows up good. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about the guy? You'll be happy to know he blows up too. Okay. Now, as to whether the sota really ever happened, that is questionable. You'll find that sometimes in the Torah where it is questionable as to whether these things ever happened. But anyways, there's a story told in the Gemara that there were two twins, women. And one of the women was accused by her husband of having an extramarital affair. So she was called by the Beis Din to come in and to drink the mei sota. She said, I will go. Anyways, before she went, the Gemara tells a story. She went to see her sister. She was frightened. And she comes to her sister and she says, look, here's the story. I have been called to the Beis Din to drink mei sota because I've been accused of having an extramarital affair. And I'm scared. I know what's going to happen. Gemara doesn't really let you in as to whether she was guilty or not. They tell the story very, very well. And the sister says to her, she goes, listen, my dear, dear sister, I love you so much. I love you with all my heart. And you know what? We look the same. Why don't I go in your place? She said, you would do that? She says, I'll go in your place. She says, okay, thank you. So the next morning comes, and the time for the arrival at the Bet Din is there, and the sister dresses up, and they put something over her face, so it wasn't clear who she was. She goes, she stands in front of the Beis Din. The Bet Din gives her the mei sota. She drinks the mei sota, and she doesn't die. She didn't have an extramarital affair. She didn't die. So everybody is happy. She goes home. She goes back to her sister, and her sister sees her approaching from a distance. So she comes out to meet her. And when she meets her, the two were very affectionate toward one another, and they kissed on the lips. And when they kissed on the lips, the sister died. Why did she die? Because there was some mei sota water still on the other sister's lip. And when she kissed her, she got some of that, and she died. I know, Ruth. Exactly. That was my response to. What a terrible story, isn't it? Terrible story. I know. But that's in the Gemara, right? Anybody have any thoughts on either of those stories? While I take a little schnapps. No, I'm kidding. It's water. It's a crazy story, eh? I know. I have books here on the Talmud, by the way, which have specifically the Agarata in it. So Ruth, just unmute yourself for a second. I want to get your reaction to that.
I had heard the first story. I don't remember having heard the second one,
Yeah.
but I like the sota always was weird to me.
Yeah.
Like how do they, if, I don't know, like
How
you
do they what?
said,
How do they what?
well, how does it prove that you had an extramarital affair? Like,
Oh,
really?
don't even go there. No, no,
So,
seriously, what you learn from the Gemara as you learn it, there are certain what we might call a priori. Like there are like my son is 16 years old. God bless him. And he is hanging around with a group right now. You probably all know that there are a lot of atheists who are 16 years old. I don't believe in God. Doesn't make sense to me. I believe in science, right? But my son is more of an agnostic, right? And I tell him, I go, when we sit down and we learn some stuff, I said, you can't ask me every single time, well, what if there is no God? Because we're not going to move forward from that. When I started learning Gemara again, when I started learning Torah again, I had to get rid of those voices. I had my rabbi's voices in my head, and they were yelling at me and they were punishing me and they were telling me my learning was this and my learning was that. And here's how you learn. Like, I very much came from a Haredi school, very black and white. So I had to get rid of those voices in order to move forward and find my own way. So while your question is a reasonable question, it really is a reasonable question. And I would tell you it's worthwhile thinking about. I would also tell you don't get bogged down in it. Because if you do, you won't be able to take the beauty out of the Torah that exists within it. Does that make sense to you at all, Ruth Shapiro?
yeah, no, it
Okay.
does. I mean, but I mean, I had, in real life, with like what happened with Rabbi Hanifi, that happened to somebody I know.
Yeah.
This gentleman, he had 14 children. He has 14 children. He has since passed. Anyways, they all came because he was dying in the hospital in London. And they all came and they were all around him. And he wouldn't die. And then half of them went home because they said, oh, he's doing better. And then he died because they were gone. Because he didn't want to die when they were all there.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. Fascinating. Ruth Darman, you had a response to the second story. Can you
I
unmute for a
thought it
sec?
was unfortunate. I mean, she almost made it. She almost saved her sister. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
embrace and that kiss, it's really too bad. It's a little funny to me, but I quite enjoyed both stories.
They were good
I don't know
stories, I
anything
know.
about Gamara, but I loved both stories.
Yeah, they're beautiful stories, and you find in the Talmud
Yeah.
itself, and Brian, you would know this, that you find in the Talmud itself wonderful, wonderful, beautiful stories. Today I learned about what is Eretz Yisrael to the Jewish people. That's what the Gemara talks about in the context of an issue. But what is it, and what is our responsibility to it, and what if you don't live in it? Do you have a responsibility to go back to it? It's very, very special stuff. I mean, I'm only telling you bits and pieces about what I've learned and about the seductivity of it for me and why I am deeply proud to be a Jew because of it. So let me get into the pride part of it because I think we have about 15 minutes. Um, the more I learned, the more I started to clear my head, from all the stuff that really had seeped into it over the years of learning from some of these very strict rabbis, some of them very antiquated in their thinking, and certainly not in sync with my way. For anyone who knows me, you'll know some of the things I do, like this past Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. I've established about 4 or 5 years ago, I established the Forest Shul. Does anyone hear of the Forest Shul? I take people into Earl Bales Park. We go deep into the trails. You know that one trail at the far end, if you go on it for about 10 minutes, you'll arrive at the end of it, and there are these rocks that you can sit on. So we go in there and I hold Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services. Now, they're not like your services. They take an hour and a half. But at some point during the service, during Shmon Esrei, I ask everybody to go find themselves a tree and to hug that tree. I said, let's live up to the stereotype people are thinking about as being tree huggers. Let's be tree huggers, right? And I instruct people to go and to touch the energy of that tree. Look, even if you don't think that there's an energy coming off that tree, the idea that those are hundreds of years old, The idea that the lushness of the forest and the beauty and the greens and the different colors. Are you guys like blown away by the colors this year? In the fall colors? Do you find it's different this year than in previous years? Right? Any idea what that is?
I think it's
I
the
think
lack
it's
of
got to
rain.
do with climate change and,
Well, that burst my bubble, didn't
oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I take it all back.
it?
Um,
I'm just kidding.
The natives think that if it's really strong like this, because they were talking on the news the other day, that it'll be a harsh winter.
Oh, okay. Well, that burst it again. Okay. I'm a artist.
Don't ask
Yeah,
questions.
right. Exactly right. Soll sein still. So I'm an artist, so I concentrate on colors. And there are times when I'm driving along, in particular with my son, where I almost feel it's too much to look at. Does anybody have that? Where it's too much to look? It's so beautiful, I can't look at it. It's too much. But anyway, so just speaking about that. So when I went on my journey had to be different than where I came from. And as I said before, I had to cut out all those voices. And I had to ask the questions that were inevitable to me, many questions which you will have. With Ruth Shapiro asked before, and it's a reasonable question. Oh, come on, what are you talking about, Mesota? And how does all this work? Is Torah learning really that unique? Is it really that different? One of the questions I asked was, if you take the tools that have been developed to learn Torah and you take them and you superimpose it over the Quran, are you going to get the same effect? One week, I give a shir on Thursday nights. You're all welcome to come to. It's a chumash shir on a weekly basis. I started off this year. I said, I'm going to read you something. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And I want you to tell me what you think it might be. So I read them this page. Clearly of, the language of 2,000 years ago. And I asked people what someone said Shir HaShirim. Other people said some other books. I said, no, that's the Quran. That's the Quran. So I had to ask myself, what is it about Torah? What is it about how we learn Torah? Is it so dramatically different than other teachings? What about the tools of which we apply to it? And we're looking for consistency. That's what people say, the Torah is consistent. Would we find a similar consistency within the Quran if we applied it to the Quran or the Bhagavad Gita or other such books? And I had to really grapple with this. And what I did was I started to surround myself, or go to, if you will. It sounds arrogant the way I said it. I started to meet and talk to people who are scholars of different backgrounds. I started to speak with people like Professor Rabbi Marty Lokshin. If you know him, he's a beautiful man. He started out a service here in Toronto, which is halachically acceptable, which is essentially run by women. I started to speak with people like Rabbi Shlomo Gemara. Rabbi Shlomo Gemara lives here in our city. It's a great name, eh? He was the Rosh Yeshiva at Or Chaim Yeshiva. He's a brilliant, brilliant human being, and he is very open to questions. When you meet people like this, not only are they open to questions, they actually demand of you questions, and they're very, very humble people. So they say, oh, they'll always make you feel good about your questions, and the list goes on and on and on. And the more I learned, the more I started to see various different models within Judaism that I hadn't seen before. And also this road that I was on and that thousands, millions of people have been on today and throughout history, which continue multi-generationally to add to this treasure chest of wisdom and knowledge, which we call Judaism, which we call the Torah. And I started to see the brilliance, and I started to sort of push off the stuff which is nonsensical, the voices out there which don't make sense to me. And you start to find your rabbis, you start to find your scholars. And let me be very clear here, and I think it's important to say, I'm not only talking about men. There are women within the Torah world today who are absolutely brilliant and unbelievable in terms of their teaching, not only Chumash, not only Tanakh, not only the Tzanarena, like my mother used to learn, God bless her soul, but Gemara. There are women who teach in Gemara. There's a specific website that one could find of this teacher in Jerusalem. I can't remember her name. And every day she teaches Daf Yomi, and she's wonderful at it. And I learned so much from her. Perkei Avot says, Ezu Chacham, who is a wise person, Lomed Mikal Adam, one who learns from everybody, and we can. Children, you can learn Torah from children. I'm sitting around the table with my family, and God bless, we're very lucky. We have a huge family, and my nieces and nephews are there, and now they have children, and they bring home Torah from school. I'm open now to what they have to say. I was very closed before, but now I'm open to it. And I take in their Torah, and I am consistently, on a regular basis, on a daily basis, more and more and more proud to be a Jew. I'm proud to be a Jew because of the Tikkun Olam, the light unto the nation that we are. We all know how many Jews win the Nobel Prize, v'chulu, v'chulu. We know that. We all got those emails. We all know about Eretz Yisrael. Eretz Yisrael is an astounding place it's astounding. My greatest regret in life is that I'm not living there now. I obviously can. I have a 16-year-old son, but maybe at the end of my days. We all know that the community that we have built here in Toronto, in Baltimore, in Cleveland, in New York, in Paris, and we go on and on and on, not only today, but in history, are models to the rest of the world. We all know that. These are things to be proud of as Jews, but my experience has been that the thing that is making me proudest is our teachings. It's our teachings. It's that thing that has maintained us throughout history and pushed us forward and helps us to continue to grow. There is more Torah learning today than ever before in history, and the beauty of it, and part of that is social media, etc. And the beauty of it is that if you like the Haredi community, you can find Haredi aplenty. If you love the Torah that's coming from the rabbi at Holy Blossom, you can find that in videos, all kinds of it. If you like Torah from people who are atheists, you can find that. There is no lack of Torah today, and the more you learn it, the more fascinated you are by it. One of the things as an example, which really blew me away, I just finished the cycle of Chumash with my students on Thursday night. Simple concept, this is the concept of Yovel. I never thought of it. I never thought of these things. I was too busy being angry, and I never really thought about what is Yovel. Yovel is Jubilee. And here's what the Torah says. Listen to this economic model. The Torah says like this, that every 49 years, you have to return your land to the person who previously owned it. Okay? That is predicated on the idea that the person who previously owned it has fallen on Saurus. Their life hasn't been so good. And comes along the sages and they ask, why do you need to do this? And there's much discussion around it, as there is on everything, by the way. You could spend your entire life on one issue. And essentially, the reason is because the economic model that is inherent to our teachings, to our Torah, to our peoplehood, is such that God did not want the 1% model to exist. In those days, if you owned land, then you were pretty well off. You were doing okay. You were not going to be found by the side of the road, metaphorically or otherwise. You were not going to be indentured. You're not going to be sold into slavery. You're not going to be sold to your brother, even, and the Torah talks about that, right? Because you have this asset. God comes along and says, listen, you have owned this piece of land for 49 years, 7 times 7. That's a long time. You should be able to develop a certain amount of wealth from that, okay? Now, what you need to do is you need to give this back. You need to share it with somebody else. Why? So that person should not become a slave, should not have to sell themselves into an indentured environment and suffer terribly, and their family suffers, and a whole list of things that happens when you're in that situation. Now, Once again, it's not clear whether Yovel ever really happened. But that economic model essentially says that we as Jews, if people say, what does Judaism say about the economy, about economics, about finances? Judaism says to be equitable. It says we need to share. We need to create an environment where we do not have slavery, where we do not have poor people, where we're conscious of what somebody else is feeling, is going through, what their financial situation is. So we need to spread the booty, if you will, around. And when I read that and when I studied it, when I read, the pshatim on it, I thought, I'm so happy to be part of this. I'm just so delighted that Torah is teaching me this, and that now I understand what it is to be Jew in the context of economics. And I don't have to tell you that we could spend days and days and weeks and months and years on the idea of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, years on it. Loving your brother as you love yourself. What does that mean? How do you love your brother as you love yourself? How do you love your sister as you love yourself? Is it possible to love someone else and not love yourself? What does it mean I love myself and then I love you? How does that work exactly? We could do this for forever. That is Judaism. That is the Torah that I am discovering. I was going to say rediscovering, but I would say discovering. So to answer succinctly is, can one be proud from their Torah learning? I believe yes. And I also believe that it is predicated on learning it properly. I think one of the challenges of the Jewish world, and this is changing, is that our rabbis and our teachers uh, used a lot of old methods in terms of teaching. And therefore, it was very black and white often, and there was a lot of punishment involved. And therefore, it wasn't that palatable, it wasn't that seductive. But I think now there are so many teachers out there who can teach you in a way where the core of Judaism is the compassion. It's human behavior. It's our interaction with others, Jew and non-Jew alike. It's our work in the world, on the environment, right? On economics, on tikkun olam. So I'm suggesting as far and wide as possible is that, to me, one of the answers to anti-Semitism, and of course we all know that anti-Semitism is rife today, is the development of ourselves. It's the development of our peoplehood. And I think that the best way of doing that, not the only way, one has to be in the front lines as well. It's really important, is through Torah learning. And what you will find within Torah learning, if your mind is open, is the brilliance of our people and the wonderment of our models, the models which exist. And it's there, it's accessible, it's at our fingertips. You can stay home, always, never have to leave your house, and learn shir after shir after shir, or your husband can be your chavruta. There's so many different options here. And so that's my answer to the question. Can learning Torah make you proud as a Jew? My answer is a yes, definitively, absolutely. Thank you.
So I'm just going to open it up for any questions for Avrum. I have a question. How do we get Avrum, our young adults, interested in learning Torah today?
Yeah, I that's the key question, isn't it?
I think it's a question that everybody's asking these days.
Yeah. So I'm going to be really simple about it, recognizing that it's not simple at all. I honestly did not. I was not passionate about most aspects of Torah. I went to yeshiva for 6 years. I was born in a rabbinical home. I've been exposed to many yeshiva bachrim, rabbis, and so on. I'm gonna guess, Brian. In some ways, that was probably your experience. It was an imposition. Judaism became an imposition. Torah became an imposition, right? You
Yeah.
need to do this, right?
Yeah, lots of rules,
Rules
and wasn't fun.
and lots of punishment,
Right.
That's not the way to teach a young person. We all know that. If you raise your children based on those rules, they are going to rebel. Essentially, as far as I'm concerned, our young people are rebelling, and they're rebelling for proper reasons. They really are. I think that Judaism, as it exists today, in many ways, what they're seeing, anyways, why would anybody be drawn to it? You know, and I think it's very problematic because we're seeing a lot of it, not all of it, obviously, but a lot of it, which is very controlling and very manipulative. And the teaching methods, which are often used in Torah environments, are very antiquated. So my answer to you is as follows. And again, please accept the fact that I recognize the complexity of this challenge. My answer is A, you get the young people involved in the development of the curriculum. And the curriculum has to be something which is progressive. And the teachers need to be fascinating human beings. And I'll give you an example. Okay, I mentioned before Rabbi Shlomo Gemara. Anybody know Rabbi Gemara? Know me, you know him, right? Rabbi Shlomo Gemara is a tzaddik. He's a righteous person, and he's a Talmud Chacham. And the man is as colorful as you could possibly imagine. He told me recently, I take every opportunity I can to schmooze with him. We were leaving shul, and I was schmoozing with him for a moment, and he says to me, Avrum, he's Israeli, right? He calls me Avrum. He says, I want you to know, he says, I have a fascination with Rome, Roman architect. And he said to the extent, and you know people who are type A and they're brilliant. We all know them. Maybe you guys are all brilliant in type A. You know those people, they all go an extra step to develop themselves. Well, he went to Rome and he studied to be a tourist guide. These are crazy people, right? Crazy people I wish I could be like. And he tells me about this, and I'm thinking to myself, this is a man I want to learn from. I sat down with him on Shabbat between Mincha and Maariv, and I asked him questions about, when you read Parshat Noach, which is this week, you know that in the first few psukim, the first few lines, it talks about how to build the ark, right? Right? Well, do you really care how to build the ark? That it has to be 75 feet this way, 45 feet this way, that it has to be covered with slime, this pitch? Do you need to know that? And what about the Mishkan? You ever study the Mishkan? You ever study the tabernacle? It's 5 parshiot on one instruction after it. Really? Really, I need to know that? So he explains to me, he says, Avram, think about literature. Think about a book. Think about on Walden's Pond. He didn't give this as an example. I'm giving this. We've all read on Walden's Pond. His description of nature is so powerful that you feel as though you're with him in the forest for those 3 years, right? He says it's dramatically explained so that your imagery of it is so powerful and that you understand it even more. And then I said to him, okay, well, that's great. Well, why the ark at all? Why not just put Noah on a mountain somewhere with his family? Why do you have to go through that whole shakla v'targ, that whole thing of building an ark? He says, the ark, he says, it's a microcosm for life. It's the container for the rebirth of humankind. And he says, if you think about it, what is it? It's covered, surrounded by water. It's like the womb, he said. It's like the womb. I said, yeah, it is like the womb, right? That's where the rebirth is happening. And he goes on to explain to me the importance of that ark and why. So my answer to your question is, we need more Rabbi Shlomo Gomoras. We need courses on how to teach teachers to teach. We as parents and people need to understand that there's a fascinating way to impart knowledge. And we need to implement that. Some people should not teach. They shouldn't. They really shouldn't, because they're good accountants and that's what they should do. Right? I'm not criticizing accountants. Most of my family are accountants. But teachers are teachers are teachers are teachers, right? Sidney Crosby's a hockey player, right? Because that's his gift in life. That's why he did not become a horse.
An accountant.
An accountant. Right, I love accountants, don't get me wrong. So my answer to your question is, we have a lot of work to do in terms of developing the Institute for Excellence of Learning within Torah. Okay? I mean, I'm paraphrasing it, or I'm parceling it out like that. We can do it. We're a brilliant people and our resources are unbelievable, Baruch Hashem. That's how you get young people. That's how you get young people. You make them part of the process. You schlep and drag 2 or 3 of them out. Then 5 of them will come out. You know, people say you have to make it hip and you have to make it really cool. Okay, fine, make it hip, you know? But is anyone here not fascinated by some of the things I said tonight? You are. Why? Because ideas are compelling. Ideas are compelling. They grip people, they hold them, they embrace them, whether you're 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 90 years old. I have a woman in my share, we all know her, Rhoda Shack. She belongs to the shul. By the way, she's not feeling well. She's in the hospital.
Oh,
I think she's feeling better, though. I think she has some stomach stuff. She is in my class on Sunday nights here in the building, and I gave everybody an assignment to teach a shir, to teach a chumash shir. At 92 years old, she set about studying it and learning it and asking questions, and then the next week coming and teaching us and the other students in the class. This is a woman who loves ideas. She loves thought. That's why we're here tonight. You guys all love thinking. That's what we need to do. We need to impart to our young people. Thinking is a powerful thing. That's the thing that helped maintain us. But even more so, it helps you develop as a human being. So that's my answer in short.
and on that note, Avram, I want to thank you so much because you've really got us going, not only with smiles and nodding of the heads, but
Thanks.
you really always catch our spirit, and we appreciate it so much. I think it's really important that you've taught us how important it is for us to learn to question
Yes.
and to learn to articulate and to learn to examine. And I think that also we can be one with nature, and that has some benefits as well. And if we can follow those concepts, I think that helps make us good. And we have to generate that to our youth and our kids and our younger people and see if they can't have that little bit of a spark that some of us have here on the screen. And I really want to thank you all for being here and sharing the program with us. It's fabulous to see you all again.
Yeah, it's nice. Nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And just a reminder that next week is part 2 of the
Yes.
4-part series. Same time, same Zoom station.
Yes, and Noreen, you have a question? Or you were just waving goodbye? Yes, same time, same place. Bye-bye, everybody.
Yeah,
You can
great
turn
to
the
see everybody.
recording off.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Avrum, thank you so much. Take
Oh,
care
it was
and
an
be
honor.
well.
It was an honor. Thank you.
As always,